morning, everybody. How we doing today? Good to have you. Thanks for being here for this service. One thing I want to bring your attention to, I know Thanksgiving's coming in a couple of weeks, but we want to go ahead and make sure you get this on your calendar. We have our Journey Kids Christmas Open House Saturday, December the 7th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. here in this space. We're letting you know, again, so you can put it on your calendar, be ready for that. There's going to be games and crafts and food. The hot cocoa truck is coming back for an appearance. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. Bring your kids if you've got Journey Kids. You need to be with them, by the way. We're not leaving them here. You're coming with them. Invite their friends to come and be a part of this. It's going to be a fun day. I will let you know that the Journey Kids team is looking for people to jump in and help and volunteer. So if you would like to do that, contact Kara, K-A-R-A, at thejourneynova.org and let her know. Or if you go downstairs to pick up your kids later, it's like, hey, I'd love to jump in and help with that event. But that's coming up on Saturday, December the 7th, all right? We're going to talk about money again. Woohoo! All right, I had one person in first service that was really happy about that. So here we go. About a year ago, there was a viral video that was making its way across the internet. It was from the Dave Ramsey Show. A local couple, a married couple, advanced degrees, from here in Washington, D.C., making about $230,000 a year between them, called in to say, we need help because we have about $1 million in personal debt. And we're just trying to figure out how do we get out of this? And so they actually shared this information. We're going to put up their debt here on the screen. Their mortgage, some of us in here are like, I would take that right now. Can we switch? Right? That would be great, right? Mortgage isn't bad at all. Car loans not terrible. But, I mean, student loans and those credit card debts are pretty strong. But the crazy part was you have these very intelligent, smart, young people who people were making fun of. They were giving them grief because of their debt, like this was abnormal. Can we be honest? Numbers may be a little bit different. They may be up a little bit or down a little bit lower, but this kind of debt, I don't think, is abnormal in our society today. We like to pretend that this is abnormal, but this kind of financial stress is all around us. In fact, last week I shared with you this survey from Thriving Wallet. I'm going to hit a couple of these again. In this survey about money and stress, they found that 90% of those surveys said money has an impact on their stress level. 65% report feeling their financial difficulties are piling up to the point of not being able to overcome them. 40% say managing their money on a daily basis limits the extent to which they enjoy life. I mean, we know that money is a stressful thing. But here's the deal. Financial stuff is hard, right? And for most of us, we never learned it growing up. I mean, think about what you learned in high school. I know here in the high schools now, if you are a high school student, you've got to take a financial course. But growing up, I didn't learn anything about finances in high school. I learned how to dissect a frog, right? I learned that the Visigoths came into Rome in 410 AD and destroyed it. I learned or tried to learn how to read Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales in Old English, right? Those are the things I remembered learning, and maybe it's the same for you. We didn't learn about finances in school, and I think probably for many people, we didn't even learn about it at home. We've been kind of left to figure it out on our own. And so as we kind of think about money, we think about stress, some of us are sitting here today and it's like, wouldn't it be great to wake up in the morning and not be stressed out about trying to figure out how to pay our bills? Wouldn't it be great to open up my banking app and not have financial anxiety before I even open it? Wouldn't it be great to plan a vacation for the future that we don't have to leverage everything right now so we can go and we can enjoy our time? Wouldn't it be great to have financial freedom? But I know there's quite a few of us in here. We've made decisions in our life that have led to financial pain. And so my hope is, as we talk today, we can talk about how to find some financial freedom. I mean, last week we talked about how we view money, right? I said money is a tool. It's not good or bad. It's a tool that we have. So money is a tool. And then we said if we believe in God, right? If we believe in God, that means that everything that we have, and in fact, everything in the world, that's God's. And then we have been giving this, whatever that may be for us, our wealth, our money that we have for ourselves. We've been given that to steward because God has given it to us. And so this week, I want to piggyback on that last piece, I want to talk about this stewardship piece. Can we be good stewards of God's money? And so we're going to talk today about how we use money, and I'm going to talk about it with a biblical perspective, of course. And I want to take us to Luke chapter 16. Jesus is teaching his disciples, and it's really this discipleship moment for them, this discipleship principle. And so I want to start there with this principle he gives them. In Luke 16, starting with verse 10, Jesus teaches, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you're not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? Now, some people in the Christian world have taken that teaching to say, if you give God a little bit of money, or maybe it's more like if you give me a little bit of money, God's going to turn this into a lot of money for you. That's not the point here, okay? Jesus isn't trying to teach his disciples how to get rich financially. What he's calling them to is faithfulness. He's saying, can you be faithful with what God has given you? Can you be faithful with a little? Whatever that might be. That might be leadership. That might be in relationships. That little might be the way that you help people in need. It might be the way that you help people to follow Jesus. Whatever it is that God has entrusted you with, if you can be faithful with a little bit of that, then God will let you be faithful with a lot. But you know one of those areas that we are called to be faithful in? We're called to be faithful when it comes to how we use our money. In fact, Jesus does hit that topic in verse 13. It says, no one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Some of you are like, wait, I think we read that last week. And we did. That was part of the Sermon on the Mount. And so the way I look at this is when you see things like this a couple of times in Scripture, probably something that we should listen to and learn from. Now, that last word that we see up there on the screen is this word money. It's actually an Aramaic word, mammon. And Jesus would use this word frequently. But actually, it was a phrase. The phrase is unrighteous wealth. We go back to verse 11 here in Luke chapter 16, and we see that same word, mammon, there again. Now, it wasn't specific to money. It was actually specific to wealth, right? Possessions, the stuff that you have. Last week we said money's not bad, right? And wealth isn't bad either. It's our love of these things that lead us down the wrong paths. In fact, the early church took this teaching and they would use this in their teaching of people who were becoming followers of Christ. And they would say, you've got to be really careful about what you love. Because if you're not careful, you will begin to love the little g God of money over loving the big G God of the universe. And so they would make sure that people understood this, that you, if you're not careful, you're going to love money more than you would love God. But again, back to this passage. The point is not money. The point is faithfulness. Are we faithful to our money, or are we faithful to God? There's kind of a funny part to this whole teaching Jesus is doing, because in the background, there's a group of people, the Pharisees, who are overhearing everything Jesus is saying. Look at verse 14. The Pharisees, who dearly love their money, heard all this and scoffed at him. Right? The Pharisees are there. They overhear this teaching. I'm pretty sure Jesus was loud enough so they could hear. That was part of the point of what he was saying here. But the reason was, for these Pharisees, they thought the more wealth they had, that was meaning that God loved them in a certain way, that God loved them more because they had more wealth. This was evidence that God was blessing their actions. This was evidence that God was blessing their righteousness because they were wealthy people. This was kind of like prosperity gospel before prosperity gospel became cool, right? But they had a problem. What was their problem? Well, it actually goes back to what we talked about last week in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. Read this out of the Message Bible and read out of the Message Bible again. The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. The struggle for the Pharisees was that they loved their mammon. They were after the little g god of money and wealth, and they actually pursued that more than they did God. And yet, what does Jesus say here? You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. You cannot love wealth and money and at the same time serve God. Well, how does this connect with us today and our money? Well, can we be faithful with what God has given us? And if so, how do we do that? What I want to do now is I want to share with you 5 very practical principles that can help us be good with our money. They can help us make good financial decisions. That can help us find financial freedom that maybe we're looking for. And at the same time, helps us to be faithful with what God has given us. All right? So if you are a practical person, this message is all for you. So grab a piece of paper, a pen, get out your phone, whatever. Take notes, take photos, whatever you want to do. You're going to get through some of these like, I can't even believe I showed up for this today. But stay with me, okay? Financial principle number 1, get on a budget. Get on a budget. You're like, really? That's what I came for today. That's what you came for today. Get on a budget. Now, we just finished a whole series called Guardrails. And in this series, we're talking about, the importance of guardrails on the road. You have them there so you don't go off into the danger zones off the road. We didn't talk about finances in that series because we knew we were doing this money series. And it's like, hey, we'll hit this during this time. A budget is one of the best financial guardrails that we can put in place. Putting a budget together is so important when it comes to our finances, even to the point where Jesus understood this and talks about how important a budget is. If we go back to Luke chapter 14, verse 28, Jesus teaches, but don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's the person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. I believe Jesus is the Son of God. And I also believe he was a comedic genius, right? The dude's got some great one-liners, and I can just kind of sense the sarcasm dripping out of this one line here. Now, he wasn't here to give us one-liners that we could laugh at. And he's not saying, hey, if you want to follow me, you need to make sure you have a financial budget in place. That's not his point. His point is he's saying, hey, there's a cost to follow me. And before you follow me, you need to figure out whether you can handle the cost of what this is going to look like for you to be my follower. That's his main point. But I read this and I think, well, this is still pretty good, right? For us financially, that a budget helps us use our money wisely. It's a guardrail that we can put up to make sure that we don't go off into those financial danger zones in our life. Put together a budget. What's a budget? We know what a budget is, right? Some of you, that's all you do all day is you work on budgets. It's numbers. But yet for some of us, when we look at our budget at home, it's numbers going in and numbers going out. That's all we see. We don't track what's happening. We just see what's going in our bank account and what's going back out, or maybe that's the way our budget is set up. Now, budget is tracking numbers, but it's with a plan in place for those numbers. Over the past, I think 5 years now, we've had a financial peace class here at The Journey. And Kirsten and Andrew Baldacci have been leading that class with a couple of other people over that course of time. And this past week I was asking her, give me some data points from this class. And she was sharing with me that over the course of 79 people that have been in that class, people have paid off about $250,000 worth of debt. The one I love the most, she's like, we've even helped an 80-year-old with his finances. I'm like, that's amazing. So it's been a great class. So I was getting some data from her, and unbeknownst to her, she throws out this paragraph to me about budgeting, and we didn't even talk about that. She didn't know this is what I was talking about today. But here's what she wrote. She said, all the research points to those who are winning with FPU, that's the financial peace class, have a budget. But not just any budget, a budget on paper, on purpose, unique to each month before the month begins, and gives every dollar a name and assignment. That is a budget, right? There's a purpose behind it. There's meaning behind it. There's something that you are working towards. And maybe some of you here today are like, well, you know what? That's what I need help with. I need guidance with this. I need help with this. Well, here we have February 2nd. We have our next financial peace class that is beginning. And so, man, if you're like, I need help here, I'd love to sign up for that. You can go to our Church Center app on your phone there. I think it's the second or third button. Click on that. You can sign up for that. There's a little cost to that. We do have some scholarship money available if you're like, hey, this might be a little tough for me to do. But I cannot recommend that class enough. And we're giving you plenty of time to plan your Sunday afternoons for that, all right? Starts February 2nd. But again, put together a budget, which then leads us into financial principle number T2, get out of debt. Let me share some of these debt statistics with you. The average American household has $104,000 in personal debt. If you have children, your debt is 14 to 51% higher than the national average, and some of us parents would agree with that. Lower earners pay significantly more of their income towards debt. That definitely makes sense. If you are over the age of 40, about 72% of your debt is your mortgage. If you're under the age of 30, about 30% of your debt is in school loans. Let's keep going. Average credit card debt increased by 17.4% from 2022 to 2023. The average credit card interest rate is 28.75%. The average payment for a new car loan monthly is $734. For a used car, $525 a month. Proverbs 22:7, just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. What does this feel like in our culture today? 28.75%, right? That's what it feels like for us. With debt, we become slaves to others. You get paid, the check comes in, and then it goes right back out to pay your debt. And most of the time, we're hardly even making a dent in the debt we do have. But getting out of debt is the key step to handling God's money God's way. Let me add, I don't think debt is evil, okay? I think it's our approach to debt that gets us in trouble. There may be circumstances where we have to go into debt to take care of some expenses we may have. I can tell you that from my experience in our marriage, we've had to do that a few times. I understand that. What's important, though, is that we make wise, responsible, spiritual decisions when it comes to our money. And so one of the best things that we can do is get on a budget and then work to get out of debt by making a plan and attacking your debt. And guess what? We have a class coming up February the 2nd called Financial Peace that you can sign up for, okay? All right, that's the last infomercial for Financial Peace. I hope you will jump in. Financial principle number 3. It's going to be a weird one. Get good friends. You're like, what? We're talking about money. We're talking about spreadsheets. Talking about budgets and debt. What does getting good friends mean? Remember when your parents used to tell you you'll become like your friends? It's very important that you get good friends. You know why this is important? Because maybe one of those friends will pay off the debt that you have, right? Those are the friends you want to make sure that you are making in your life. Now, the reality is that research has shown that people we are in relationship with influence us financially. There's a correlation between our friendships and our financial situation. There was a study that showed over a 10-year period, your income will approximately be within 10 to 20% of the average of your 10 closest friends' incomes. Some of you are like, I need to change tax bracket friends, right? We are friends with people, and whoever they may be, in the end, they have the power to affect us financially. I love this passage from Paul. It's actually a quote Paul quotes within a letter that he writes, 1 Corinthians. And he pulls this out of a secular context. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. He quotes, bad company corrupts good character. This quote that Paul uses here comes from a Greek comedy that was called Thais, and it was actually written by a Greek poet, Menander, not in any way connected to the commanders, in case you guys thought that was a little bit short. Maybe that's the way we should call them, right? But Paul takes this secular idea, the secular quote, to make this theological point for Christians. And his point here is the people around you will affect your faith. The people around you will affect your theology. But guess what? The people around us will affect us financially. You spend money like the people you spend time with. Get good friends. Spend time with people with the same vision and the same values as you. And when you see people that you're around and they're financially astute, man, there's no better person to go to and say, hey, I've got financial questions for you. Can you answer these for me? But a big part of that is making sure we have the right people around us. Get good friends, and you'll be surprised how much financial heartbreak that you'll be saved from. It's financial principle number 3. Financial principle number 4, get to saving and investing. Some of us have a vision for the future, right? We kind of sit back and, we're thinking about retirement, what that's going to look like and where that's going to be and what we want to do. So we've got this big picture vision in front of us, and yet the way we treat our money is that we're very nearsighted when it comes to our pocketbook. I want this for the future. This is what this vision looks like for me, but I'm going to spend what I have now. Go back to Proverbs. By the way, Proverbs is great. If you haven't read it, go read it. So much good stuff here. Proverbs 21:20. The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. In the ancient world, if you had extra money and clothes and food, people would look at you and they would say that you were wise. They would say that you were wise because you had more than they did, and so you must have been really good with your money. And so that's what we see here, right? Proverbs 21. The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. Translation here is smart people save. Wise people have extra money. They see this bigger picture. They think about the long term. What's the fool do? The fool may think big picture, but the fool spends everything that they have. They're nearsighted when it comes to their money. Maybe another way to put this is a wise person lives on less than they make. And so for us, maybe it's time for us to invest and save. CNBC said that more than half of Americans could not pay a $1,000 emergency bill right now. Think about that. We talk long term when it comes to money, but we act short term when it comes to our finances. And so to use money well, that we have been given to steward by God, we learn to live on less and to save more. Let me give you a couple of ideas here. Save for an emergency fund, right? I just gave you that CNBC findings there. Save for an emergency fund. If you take the FPU course, one of the things that they will say from the very beginning is you need to have $1,000 in an emergency fund somewhere. And some of us are like, that doesn't sound like that much, but for some of us, that's a lot of money, right? And so work to save that money. And as you save that $1,000, the next thing you do is you save for a month, and then you save for 3 months, and then you save for 6 months, but save for an emergency fund. Another idea, invest in retirement. Put money away in your retirement. Some of you get matching money from your company. I know it's not as common as it used to be, but there's no reason. Let me stop here. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a tax expert. Don't take any of this. You need to talk to people who actually do this for a living. But I think if your company matches stuff, it's probably a good idea when it comes to retirement to put in what they match. Again, not a CPA there. But even if you're thinking about long term and you're like, hey, I'm going to retire, but I'm going to keep working, still put money away for that. You never know what might happen. So invest in your retirement. And then save for big purchases. Set aside money for a car. Set aside money for weddings. I think we got 2 families here who have 4 girls in their homes. Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine the wedding bills that are coming? Like, if that's you, you need to start saving right now for that. You got college too coming up. But start saving for things like that. That 85-inch TV you want in your living room, hey, save for it. Pay cash for it. Set a date. Have a target cost. Begin to put money away. Save for those big purchases. In the end, learn to invest and save. All right? Now, those first 4 principles, if you think about them, they're all for me, right? They're all for you. These are things that I can do for myself. This is me saying, hey, God, I want to be faithful with what you have given me in my life, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to be faithful here because I'm going to help myself in some way. This last principle is a little bit different. Financial principle number 5, get grateful and get generous. I told you a little bit earlier, Thanksgiving's coming up in a couple of weeks, and for me, it's the 3 F's. It is football, food, and family, in that order, by the way, right? Am I right? Those is how important Thanksgiving is, but Thanksgiving's kind of lost in all the hoopla, but the reality is Thanksgiving's not a season like Christmas is. Thanksgiving is a day, but what do we do on Thanksgiving? Like a lot of us start thinking about the things that we're grateful for, don't we? We start thinking about the things that we are thankful for. And maybe on Thanksgiving Day, as you guys are eating dinner with family and friends, you sit around the table and you begin to ask each person, like, hey, what are you thankful for? What are you thankful for? And everybody just kind of shares. And after Thanksgiving's over with, that very next day, what are we about? Are we about gratitude? Usually not. It's like it's time to go shopping, right? Time to knock some people out so we can get some good stuff and we can buy this for Christmas. It's almost like we forget about our gratitude. What if every morning we woke up, what if every day we had this attitude of gratitude? That it wasn't just one day a year that we sat back and said, hey, I'm thankful because it's Thanksgiving, but every day that we lived, we were grateful for everything that we had. And not about the stuff that I just want to be thankful for myself, but maybe we just take a look at everything that we have and everything that God has given us and entrusted us and everything we're called to be stewards of, and we see all that and we say, hey, God, thank you for this. Like if I never get anything else again in my life, thank you for what I have. Because when you and I begin to have an attitude of gratitude, it begins to make us more generous with what we do have. And again, if we're called to be good stewards of what God has given us, and we're thankful for it, it's going to turn us into generous people. And now everybody's real quiet because you're like, here it goes. Chad's going to tell us to give to the church. And you're right, partly wrong. Let me explain that to you. Let me say this. If you are not a follower of Jesus and you're here at this church, there is zero expectation that you give to this church. Now, if you want to, because there's something about this place that you love and you care about, there's a mission that we're a part of and you believe in the mission in some way, hey, feel free to do that, okay? But if you're not a follower of Christ, there is no expectation for you to give. Now, if you call a journey home and you haven't changed your mind in the last 15, 20 seconds or the last few minutes because of this series, you're still like, I'm in. Hear me out. Okay, I'm going to surprise you. There is no expectation that you give to the journey, okay? However, I am going to challenge you if this is you. I'm going to challenge you that if you say you follow Jesus, I'm going to challenge you to live out gratitude. Or if you say that your life is different and you're transformed because of Jesus, I'm going to challenge you to live out gratitude. And one of the best ways we live out gratitude is through generosity. Now, I know some of you hear the word generosity and you think give, right? You think offering. You're thinking they've got budgets. They've got to pay salaries. They got to keep the lights on. They got to make sure the heat is working. There's community projects they've got to pay for. And there's teen events and kids classes. And Chad wants a Gulf Stream. So there's all these things that we've got to give this money to. It's all about give. When I talk about generosity, when we talk about generosity here at The Journey, we are not talking about making budget. When we talk about generosity, we're talking about being faithful with what God has entrusted to us. And so here's what I'm going to leave us with today. I am going to challenge us in our generosity, okay? And what I'm going to share with you, there's going to be these 3 different things that you can jump into. And if you're a follower of Christ, you're going to fall into one of these 3, all right? You just got to choose which one of these 3 that you want to be challenged with. Now, let me say this too. This challenge is for the next 23 weeks. It's not because I'm a Michael Jordan fan. I don't like Michael Jordan as a basketball player, never have. It has nothing to do with the number 23, except for there are 23 weeks between today and Easter Sunday, okay? So we said, hey, let's just go for this Easter Sunday, 23 weeks. What would it look like for us to be faithful with a little over these next 23 weeks? So here's my challenge for us. Here's challenge number one. Again, this is some of you. It's going to hit some of you. Give 10% of your income over the next 23 weeks. Now, some of you are like, oh yeah, that's a tithe. That's what you want us to give. I want you to hear me out a second. And some of you may be saying, well, I don't know what that means. Let me kind of give you a little history of the tithe. It comes from way back in Abraham time, but over time, the Jewish leaders really began to take the tithe and change it, okay? Tithe means 10%. And so if you were Jewish, you didn't have some option like, hey, I'm gonna tithe or not tithe. It was mandatory. Like if you were Jewish, you had to tithe. But they had 3 tithes. They didn't just have like a 10% thing. They had 3 tithes. 10% that they gave, now this was money and grain and goods, would go to the temple and would go to the priests and the Levites that worked there. So 10% would go there. 10% would go to parties and festivals. Some of you are like, I would give to that. You just tell me the line item, I'm in, right? So 10% would go to parties and festivals because they were always celebrating something as the Jewish people. The last 10% was actually broken up over 3 years. And so you'd give a little bit over 3%, and this would actually go to the poor. And so every year, you were required to give this 23% back. Now, that doesn't sound like generosity, does it? That sounds like a tax. And basically, it was a tax to make sure that everything functioned the way that it needed to function. By the way, that 23% has nothing to do with our 23 weeks. It's just happenstance. I've looked in the New Testament. I can't find anywhere where Jesus says, if you follow me, you need to give 10% of your income. Now, Jesus says you need to be generous, which when I hear that, I think, well, that means more than that there's really not a percentage. It's really more than that. It's everything that we have. But Jesus doesn't say give 10%. So why am I saying, hey, we're looking for some of you to jump in and say, I'm going to give 10% over the next 23 weeks. I actually think 10% is a really good goal for those of us that say we follow Jesus. Because here's what we're saying. We're saying, okay, God, you've entrusted me with 90% of this, or 100% of this. 90% of this, I'm going to live on. I'm going to pay my bills. I'm going to pay off my debts. I'm going to send my kids to school. I'm going to buy a pair of new shoes. I'm going to do everything that I need to do. I'm going to have a place to eat, or a place to stay, a place to have food, all that kind of stuff. 90% I'm going to use for that. 10% of this, I'm going to give to you. Because I want to show you that I understand how faithful you've been to me, and now I'm going to be faithful back to you. And so I'm inviting some of you to jump in and to give 10% of your income over these next 23 weeks. Again, if you want to jump in, that would be great. Now, don't run out. I got 2 more here, okay? Maybe you don't fit there. Generosity challenge number 2. If your finances are a mess, then just choose some percentage of your income to give over these next 23 weeks. You go back to that financial peace class, and if I'm not mistaken, they will teach one of the best things you can do to become generous with your money is actually to get out of debt, right? Get out of debt, and that gives you a larger portion of your money to be generous with, however you want to be generous with you. So maybe you're working on that right now, or maybe you're like, well, it's kind of a mess, but I'd still like to do something. You just choose a percentage. I don't care. Maybe it's 1% or 0.5% or 3%, whatever it may be for you. And so over the next 23 weeks, you're like, hey, I'm going to give a percentage of my income to show my gratitude towards what God has done for me. Some of you would fall into that category. And then the last one is, if you don't give, or maybe you've never even given before in your life, it's just pretty simple. We're inviting you to give $23 for 23 weeks, okay? $23 a week for 23 weeks. That comes out to $529 if my math is right. Some lady wrote a check this morning, was like, hey, here's my 23 weeks, I'm done. And why would we do this? Well, it helps us begin to show that our gratitude towards God is coming through our generosity. Like, I still got these bills, I still got these things that I got to do, but I want to do something to say, hey, God, I want to be faithful with a little. And will you be faithful back to me in return? Now, pretty simple thing. If you open up your Church Center app and you pop it open. The second button on there says 23-week generosity challenge. We're inviting you to do this. I've had a couple of people like, hey, we already give. What do we do? If you already give, we'd love for you to go ahead and throw it like, hey, man, I'm still in for this. I'm giving 10% or I'm giving a percentage, whatever it may be. And here's the deal. We are not going to email you every week like, hey, you forgot to give this week. What's going on? We're not going to do that. We're not going to send you all kinds of emails like, don't forget. We may send you some encouragement like, hey, thanks for signing up for this. But we just want to see how many of us can say, hey, we want to be faithful with a little. And over these 23 weeks, see what happens through God at work. Okay? Pretty simple thing we're challenging all of us to do. Let me add a couple things. Some of you are probably thinking the church just wants my money. This is just some ploy to get our money. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If that's what you think, do not give your money to this church. Okay? I want you to hear me. If you think that we're just doing this to get money from you, do not give your money to this church. But I am going to ask you to think about generosity for yourself and give it somewhere else. There's a nonprofit you love. There's maybe even some other church you like more than this church. Give to them. I don't care. This is not about trying to get more money out of people, all right? This is about having gratitude, and this is about generosity, and this is about faithfulness. But if you don't feel like this is where you want to do it, give your money somewhere else. But just begin to have this heart of gratitude where you're generous in your life, okay? Other thing I want to say, we're not in a financial crisis, okay? Some people are like, oh gosh, are we in a financial crisis? You're doing a money series. No, we're not in a financial crisis. Yeah, this year's been different than years in the past, but that's okay. We've got reserves. We're good to go. We're not in a financial crisis. Everything's happening that needs to happen. It's not the reason we're doing this. It comes back to faithfulness. Are you and I more faithful to our money, or are we faithful to God? Can we be faithful in the little things? Because if we can be faithful in the little things, God will be faithful in the big things. And our money is one of the most tangible ways that we can show our faithfulness to God. All right? I want to leave you with this conversation I had last week. One of my friends here at the Journey, I call him our resident agnostic. Man, he has been here for quite a few years. His family comes. He's here every Sunday almost. He's in my life group. He's a part of a lot of things that we do here. He asks, I think, some of the most pointed questions when it comes to faith and Christianity and Jesus and the church, better than a lot of Christians that I know. And he'll tell you, like, man, I don't know about this Jesus thing. This guy, I'm still trying to figure this out. He's more committed than most Christians I know, okay? It's pretty amazing. Last week he was here and he heard the message in our group, and he was asking a question or talking to me. He said, Chad, he's like, why in your message did you tell everybody that you don't like doing these messages because you know people don't like it when you talk about money in the church? And I said, well, the reason is because when you talk about money, Christians get upset, right? Because money is so important to Christians. And their money is so important to them. My money is so important to me. And he looked at me, and in all sincerity, he said that maybe you need to talk about money every single week. I said, that's a great idea, and we're going to start that this week, right? No, we're not going to do that. But I thought about that this week, and as I'm working through this, and I'll be honest with you guys, I struggle with some of this stuff. I mean, Kara and I, we try to do a budget, and sometimes we're great, sometimes we're not. We got some debt we're trying to pay off. But we get it, right? We're not going to change our tax bracket of friends, so don't worry about that. But there's aspects of this, as I listen to that, and I hear him say those words to me, I think, do I love my money more than I love God? And that's the question I'm going to leave you with today. Do you love your money more than you love God?